You, what's going on, y'all? It's Jason Reviews here, back at it again, this time with another new creative concept. One of the last videos I'm getting out before NOME 12 is all the gnomes ranked from worst to best. Definitely been thinking about putting this one together for a while. Now we're coming up on our 12th installment, but we've had 11 so far. There's a lot of variability there, a lot of different highs, a lot of different lows, some bust cards, some cards that are considered some of the best ever in battle rap history. So we're going to be going over each card. I'm not going to go over, who I necessarily had winning each battle, but we're going to point out some of the key points, pop up some graphics on some of the cards, maybe some performances that didn't go down that night, some tricky situations. But overall, we're just going to start from what I think is the worst gnome that we've had up to this point, and we're going to go all the way to the best. So without further ado, let's just get right into ranking them. So to start out, bottom of the barrel, what do I have as the worst gnome that we've had up to this point? It is Gnome 10, Gnome X. And the funny part about this is that it quite possibly has the best battle in GNOME history. We know that Daylight versus Rock is considered, for a multitude of different reasons, considered one of the better battles and was on my top 5 battles in GNOME history, although it wasn't number 1. A lot of people have it at number 1, though. So how can you have a battle that good and the card fall? The problem is that this is a one-card battle, one-trick pony, I suppose you could say, in a way. Because after Daylight Rock, you had an insane headliner with Lux versus Surf, but sadly, we know Surf choked multiple times. Lux turns around and kind of, I think, there's some speculation if Lux, spit a different third, but clearly, his energy wasn't there as the battle went on. He already knew that he was winning going into the third, and then, so chokes go and kill that battle. Then you have Geechee versus Averb, which, for me, I think is actually kind of a blah battle. Some people like it. I think it's more of a shock factor because Verb makes it a debatable battle, so shout out to him. But even then, it's not that good. John versus Ill Will did not go down, was pushed to SM10. And then with your openers, the 25K, Jay versus Font, one of the anticlimactic for how good UM1 was, sadly, even though it's a decent little battle. And then Mike P killed Saga, and someone debate that shouldn't even be a known battle at the time. It definitely made a lot of sense, them fighting up, but Saga coming and choking all 3 rounds. Easily worst performance of the night, but for me, pretty clear performance of the night on this card, Daylight. I'm going to give my performer of the night for, every gnome here, but absolutely, 3 rounds of incredible, and you would even say Rock was probably the second best performer on the card. Sadly, though, he went up against Light, Gentleman's 30, so that is what I had as the lowest gnome, and then following that up, I guess runner-up for the lowest spot is Gnome 4. A card that also has one of the better battles in GNOME history, Clips versus Tay-Rock. Obviously, it did not go down that night. It went off as a one-off after the event. I'm not sure. I got to look up the history of why it got moved. Probably venue got shut down early, something of that nature. But Rock versus Clips rematch obviously was great. So it's another situation where you ask, why then is this so low? And you could really debate this or Gnome X for the lowest spot. But the egregiousness of Gnome 4 is that there is some atrocious battles on here. Now, I'm going to go over some of the good ones real quick. Verb versus Goods, definitely a good battle. One of the better battles probably from both in their catalog. So that was good. As well as Gaddis versus Miss Hustle, which actually turned out to be one of the better back and forths on the card, although I had Miss Hustle winning. So then you get to the battles. DNA bodies Ill Will. Definitely a big moment for DNA. Good for his career. Probably good in the building. But, body bag, only so much replay value I believe you can get from that. Although he is the iconic smack get him the fuck out of here moment. And then you get to John bodying Reed Dollars, but that's more about Reed being bad than it is John being great. Credit that man his win, but not a very rewatchable battle. Cortez versus T-Rex, an abomination, and then B-Magic versus Big T, an atrocity. So you have 2 of probably the worst battles, especially Big T versus B-Magic. Jesus Christ. Choking versus absolutely nonsensical, just horrible writing, just a bad performance, and then the time limits, all the weird stuff with T-Rex and Cortez. So to the lows here, probably lower than any of the other gnomes. Thankfully, Verb Goods, Clips Rock kind of is able to carry the load up there, and a good female matchup, woman on woman, which we don't get to see that often on the big card. So I had Gnome 10 in my last place, and in 10th place, I do have Gnome 4. Then as for the 9th place spot on this list, we have Gnome 2. So the second Gnome ever took place in Chicago, so definitely different on the setting. One of the first times that you saw URL, traveling, obviously based out of New York for many years, but this was one of the first, initial events where they really stepped out into a whole other region. I don't even believe they've had an event in Chicago ever since, so pretty monumental when you think of it from that perspective. And it had a main event of Clips versus Big T in the middle of Big T's prime, so he's popping at the time. That was a pretty cool battle too, and Clips was obviously at his peak as well, so it makes for a decent main event. And you know, besides some things that happened off camera, I don't think that this was just some horrible event. But some of these battles don't also, it's kind of stuck in purgatory where it's like, you know, they're not the worst of the worst of the worst. And then you also don't have any that just blow up off the page. You know, you look at battles like Verb versus X Factor. Okay battle. X Factor actually beats Verb clear, which is crazy to think about. And with that win, you kind of could have argued at the time X Factor was #1 out of the Midwest. Kind of crazy, you know, the way that we talk about X Factor now. His career, obviously, as a whole, doesn't pan out to being in that conversation whatsoever. But at the time, you know, a pretty cool win, I think, especially in hindsight. But up until the third, when Verb did the blindfold thing, it was a pretty good battle. QP versus John. Another cool battle. O-Red versus Big Cannon. Big Cannon has one of the biggest crowd reactions ever. And, you know, Big Cannon's been on a Gnome for those that, you know, don't know. So it's cool. These, like, one-timers on Gnome and stuff, it's funny to go back and see that. Like, a lot of people probably didn't even know Big Cannon had made a Gnome. But he had a good battle with O-Red, had one of the more historical rebuttals and moments in URL history. JC versus YK was also okay. And I believe Conceited versus Mills was on this card. And that was, you know, admissible. Nobody's really talking about that battle, so that should tell you what you need to know. Is an okay battle. But like I said, no humongous peaks. And outside of, and then one humongous low in Young Ill versus Cortez. Obviously, you know, a lot of craziness happened with Young Ill at the time. A lot of rumors that, you know, he was on drugs. Nobody knew why he showed up with basically no round. So strange all the way around. And that's what lands Gnome 2 into the bottom 3. And then following that, at the number 8 spot on this list is one that might shock you guys. I have Gnome 3. One of the most impactful, probably one of the most historical Gnomes that we could talk about when we talk about big name matchups, maybe some career-altering battles that happened. You know, from an impact standpoint, though a lot of people probably just off the top of their head would name that higher. Now, why is it lower? The quality of battles here is actually pretty disgusting for the names involved. Hollow versus Surf headlined the card and is looked at, you know, at the time was a good battle and even now has amazing moments. I mean, Surf's first versus Hollow is historic, but Surf writes extremely downhill those 2 rounds. We know Earn and Ash, Durango, all the MMG scheme. I mean, the reaching, very, very bad structural writing. Hollow was okay. I think he just did enough to sneak a win in a battle that overall Surf's first is kind of better than the rest of the battle put together. But I think Hollow damn near snuck a clear win on the playback. And the battle hasn't aged too well to me outside of probably that first by Surf, maybe a couple Hollow lines. Clips versus Magic, considered, you know, one of Clips' first clear losses, career performance for Magic. Hitman versus Conceited is horrendous. Disaster versus T-Rex is horrendous. Big T beat K-Shine, had the iconic bunny ears bar, but as that battle goes on, trust me, on the rewatch, not a fantastic battle through and through. It's a Big T win, but it's not even like he gave 3 rounds of amazing. And then Chila versus DNA, considered one of the worst in both their catalogs, just kind of drags, a lack of stage presence shown from both. So a lot of great high impact moments, but I do have Gnome 3 here at 8 on my list. And if you guys didn't get the gist from Gnome 3, obviously I was a little bit critical of it in the way that I just went over it just now, but it is a decent Gnome. I think it's lower on the list compared to the other Gnomes, but I think it's decent. I think every Gnome from here on out was a good to great Gnome. So just a little heads up, you know, everything above 8, I think here is, you know, pretty solid, even if it's on the lower half of the list. And to get into my number 7 spot, ironically, it is Gnome 7. Definitely, I think a little bit of an underrated Gnome. I think it was promoted a little weird at the time. This was around, I believe, Gnome 6 and Gnome 7. They gave us back like in the same year, which might be one of the only time they've done that for Gnome. But it had a headliner of K-Shine versus T-Rex. Now, for being completely honest, we know that some of T-Rex's battles, you know, particularly almost all of T-Rex's battles post-2015, there is sometimes a lack of just 3 rounds. I think some battles he gives you a great round to be happy about. Some battles he gives you nothing to be happy about. But this is one of those battles where I think Rex actually gives you one of his better rounds in this like newer era that you can look back on. His first versus K-Shine is great. Pretty personal. It's what we wanted from that matchup. Now, Rex wasn't able to hold that through the second and third. You know, kind of loses gas. Something that we see a lot with some of the DVD era rappers. And Shine, in the middle of his prime, has a pretty collectively great 3-round performance. I mean, you could even pretty much give Shine the first. The round is, you could say the round is debatable. I mean, what Rex had was a lot of substance, so shout out to him on that. But Shine won the battle clearly in a pretty good main event. And the rest of the card is solid. You have Rock versus Chess, Battle of the Night. One of the best battles in Gnome history. Also made my top 5 Gnome battles list. So that's probably the highlight of the night. And then the rest of it is filled out with some good matchups and highlight performances. Goods versus T-Top is a decent battle. Just another showing of Goods coming back, facing a guy at the top of his game, and kind of getting a good debatable in there. Shug versus Av, one of the better. Shug highlight first kind of dominates the battle. It had people thinking Av lost it clear for a long time. I think that battle's debatable. I even edge it to Av, but one of the better Shugs that we've seen, at least in pockets, giving us moments. And then Ill Will versus Briz. In my opinion, the best Briz performance of all time, all things considered, and clearly beating a very good Ill Will. So like I said, between Ill Will and Briz, Rock versus Chess, there is some great battles on here. So that's what lands Gnome 7 at the number 7 spot. And then from there, we'll get right into the number 6 spot, which is Gnome 5. Another one that is really historic when you break down the moments on it. Headliner of Clips on Hollow. We know Hollow, the Kit Kat, breaking down Clips' style. One of, if not the best style breakdowns in the history of battle rap. Historic. They were both GOAT names at the time. You could even debate that they both are now, but definitely are like in the top 3, almost locked. This battle had a lot to do with the hierarchy, all-time hierarchy, how we view these battlers in battle rap. And then from there, you Shine with a monstrous, maybe the worst body of all time over Averb. Just annihilated Averb. So it's a rewatchable body bag, so that should tell you how bad it was. DNA versus Sirius was a cool battle. Official and Jazz is a very good battle, one of the better battles that was on Gnome 5, and Official had a highlight performance, handing Jazz a clear loss, which, there's not a lot of that in Jazz's resume, even though she doesn't step out that often. And then finally, Surf versus Rock, which to me is the most disappointing. Some people say this battle has aged better with time. I just find it as a hard, 50-plus minute watch. Not the worst that either of them have shown, but outside of, Ram on the steering wheel, like the Dodge logo, maybe some of the Ski and Surf set, it's a lower version. So it's a cool battle, but it just lasts 50, 55 minutes. It's a tough rewatch. So right here at about the middle of the board at the number 6 spot, we have Gnome 5. And right before we start off the top 5 here, just want to say, especially 3 through 5, I'm pretty confident in my top 2 picks, but 3 through 5, I'm also confident in, but they are very preference-based. I mean, these are 3 very good cards that I think that you could align all different through 3 through 5. So just a heads up, if you disagree with a couple of my picks here, just know that if you flip 1 or 2 around, I wouldn't be mad at it. Personally, that's what I did. I wasn't dead set, but this is what I ended up on. And at the 5 spot, to start off the top 5, we have Gnome 6. So Gnome 6 and Gnome 7 both took place in the same year and kind of on the higher part of my list. So shout out to them. It was a good year in battle rap. Card included Clips versus Ill Will. Good battle, had its moments. For Eclipse that around the time wasn't battling very seriously, it felt like this is one of the better unserious Clips performances. Take that as you may. If you get it, you get it. So definitely had some good lines in there, but he will smith him for 7 pounds, just like he did every battle around that time. He was letting y'all know, using kind of the same bars over and over sometimes. And Will had a good performance in peaks and valleys. He had a couple pauses. A couple times he lost the crowd, but the Derrick Rose freestyle, definitely makes for a decent battle. Rock versus Nitty was the co-main event of this card. Probably the most disappointing considering the hype put into it. I think Nitty's first is actually fantastic, one of his better big stage rounds ever. And then from there on out, physicality takes away from the second. They both have okay seconds. I didn't like Rock as his whole stepfather. He's his dad or whatever. I thought that was very strange. And then to top that, Nitty's third is horrendous. It is probably his worst round as a professional, or at least worst round on URL that I can think of. The training angle did not hit whatsoever. And then he gets back from that terrible execution and then gets into rushing through his punches, and it's probably the lightest punches of the battle he has. So he ends the battle on a whimper, and it's kind of what has everybody looking at that battle weird. But like I said, second's okay. First I thought Nitty did good and Rock was decent, and then the third, So that was considered the worst of the night. But from there, you get Chess versus Av as the replacement for DNA Daylight. I believe Daylight no-showed that Gnome, so they predicted it and got this, and that was a great way to showcase these two talents. too young in terms of battle rap talents. Av had a monstrous, historic first round. Still one of the better performances Av's had to this day. And Chess fought back with a great second. Av closes out with a pretty great third. So very, very good battle. Surprise battle being one of the better battles of the night. It was a real surprise. They really put him on stage and nobody knew it was going to happen. And then that leads to the last battle of the night, which was Surf versus T-Top. Great battle. It was on my honorable mentions for my top 5 known battles list. Just a dope, debatable, and 2 of their highlight performances, especially in recent years. So that's number 5. And for number 4, I have the most recent gnome, Gnome 11. I was a big fan of Gnome 11. A lot of new talent on the card, which can throw some people off, but I think it led to some great quality battles. Av versus Jade and Nightwing is a great back-and-forth battle. I think Danny Myers really let the ball go versus Sick, or this could be higher, because I think that could have been a battle of the night, a classic. Even for the material Danny got out, you could tell he wrote well, but no excuse, choked, quit. I mean, it was ridiculous. Sick just annihilated him. So that is that leads on a whimper. But B-Dot versus DNA, very good back and forth, debatable. Easy did beat Rex clear, but very similar to the Shine battle. Rex has a first that makes you happy to see Rex again, gives you some nostalgia. So good way to build Easy, and one of the better Rex performances, post 2014, 2015. Mike P versus Lou, good back and forth. T-Top versus Swamp didn't go down. Day 2 was even decent with JC Fonz and Loso Jerry. And then you get to the 2 top battles, Rock clearing Chila. Good, statement win for Rock after Chilla's Champion of the Year run. And then Geechee versus Nitty, splitting the 150. Super historic, extremely good battle at that. I just think this card is full of a bunch of solid battles. And to top it off, Geechee versus Nitty rematch for that amount of money. So that's what landed these battles at 4 and 5. And then to crack into the top 3, I got here Gnome 8 at number 3. Was this the first Gnome? And I believe this was the first Gnome in Houston. And boy, it was, Houston's turned out to be an amazing crowd. I cannot wait to be in the building for Gnome 12 in Houston. It's now Gnome has pretty much become, outside of the COVID year, it looks like Gnome is basically a Houston event. So this was the start of all that. And you have a good card. Loso has his debut, his PG versus Scotty, which was, I think, a great way to introduce Loso considering his buzz at the time, which is actually a really good battle. Scotty shows out good in his first, so shout out to Scotty getting up there, and getting down. For a guy that, probably, isn't technically a part of the URL roster like that, showing love for Houston, Scotty, how big he is there. I thought he did great. I think Loso won the battle, but I thought it was a pretty good back and forth for a surprise battle like that. Ill Will versus T-Top, one of Ill Will's more dominant and just good wins, especially on URL. 13 T-Top in a grudge match. Shug versus Twerk, one of the only complete 3-round twerks we've ever gotten, one of the better twerks we've ever gotten, and a very good shotgun Shug. Takes a good loss, I will say here, because Shug was great, but Twerk, obviously fully prepared, is kind of a different level battle rapper. It's one of the few times you got to see him apply himself like that. So that was a great battle. DNA versus JC. DNA has a monster first. JC comes back with great second and third just to close out for the clear win. And a very entertaining clear win battle. Very good 2-1. Clips versus Briz is probably looked at as the only disappointment of the night. It's not even a terrible battle. I think it's an okay battle. Pretty mucky, debatable. And Clips, just like with the Ill Will battle, Clips around this time was the king of just making some mucky debatables with great, pretty much star talents. It's crazy you got to Ill Will and Briz probably around the time they should have killed them, but the way the battle, Clips is able to work the room. It turns out to be some mucky debatables. So bottom of the card, but it's definitely okay. And then you get to Goods versus Rock. Goods was able to shock some people by making this battle close. I still think Rock won first and third, but you get a great first. Goods has a great second, kind of to diffuse some of what Rock's doing, and then a pretty close third. And then for the main event of the night, Shoe Surf versus Rum Nitty, a battle that I actually like a lot replay value-wise. I think they both have incredible first rounds. Nitty's a hard stumble. I don't think it's a choke, but it was a very, very hard stumble. Takes away, and then on top of that, even without the stumble, Surf has a pretty great 8 to 9 minute first round. I know that we poke holes at some of the weird in-between bars he had that weren't that good, which is only parking lot. I don't know about that, Surf, but I thought he had a good one overall. The Bill Cosby line, a bunch of things that go good. And then as the battle goes on, I think Surf's second is not very good, and Surf chokes in the third. But I actually like Rum's second. I think got slept on a little bit in the building. And then, the choke kind of takes away. So it's a battle I personally like a lot. Maybe that's just why my opinion has it up here at 3. But besides that, I mean, between Shug, Twerk, Ill Will's dominant performance, Goods versus Rock, I just think that there was a lot of guys that gave at least a great highlight round in their career, if not a great back and forth battle. So, that's why I have Gnome 8 at number 3. And on to the runner-up spot. I do feel confident these are objectively, and in this order, the top 2 gnomes. It is the first gnome ever, Gnome 1. Just so much nostalgia and kind of historic performances here that you could see where guys shape their careers going from here. Redacted versus Rich Dollars, for people that understand that, y'all understand that. That battle happened. It was decent. Then you have Shotgun Shug versus Midwest Miles. Definitely a pretty good back and forth. I don't really much more to say about that. Just a solid battle. But the top 4 of where you get here on the card is where you get, some of the real historical, the landmark battles for some guys going forward. You have K-Shine versus Calico. Calico kind of washes K-Shine. This is when Cal was going really hard at Dot Mob, kind of public enemy number 1 to them. And just one of the more historic Cal performances. You get the ride within our laps. I went over this in my my Golden Years video for Calico. If y'all want to check that out, going over that whole run of Calico's career in 2011, 2012. Sue Surf's dominant performance versus X Factor. It was actually a really good X Factor, but this is one of the more complete surfs of all time. The Midwest movement, whole scheme breakdown, that historic stuff. 49er San Fran, he was just getting busy up there, showing flashes of performance, lyricism, looked hungry. So one of the better surfs ever and one of the better Cals ever. You get Young Ill versus DNA, definitely a good battle. Young Ill in his prime, one of the bigger stars at the time too, so you got to appreciate that. Those throwback Ill performances, and DNA wasn't that bad, but just Ill was on a different level at the time. Rock versus O-Red, one of the best battles of the night. Great back and forth from 2 guys, coming up at the time. Young, hungry Rock, O-Red, young and hungry with the dreads. Very good back and forth, and then a main event of Hollow versus Goods, where I believe Hollow handed Goods his only clear loss of his career. I believe it's the only clear loss of Goods' career. I think that's just a crazy monument to have there. Good matchup, pretty good Hollow. I think the battle's aged a little poorly. There's some corny stuff. The hands count on me is no, none of that. None of that at Gnome 12, please, Hollow. But yeah, that's why I had Gnome 1 at number 2, and that makes it obvious. I feel like most of you guys know what would be number 1 when we were coming in here. Gnome 9. Not just the best gnome ever, in my opinion. This transcends, and in my personal opinion, is the best battle rap event ever. Top to bottom, just a fantastic card. Every battle gave you something. John versus Jack Boy. I thought Jack Boy had a fantastic first that he took against John. Probably the best round Jack Boy's had on the big stage up to this point. I think he's had a very suspect track record up there. But that first versus John, he showed flashes. We'll love to see him get a chance soon. But John, as we know, the chain angle, historic. Second, had Jack Boy jumping off the stage in the 3rd round. So that's an all-time pillar there to start the night. Shug versus Pat Stay, probably the best Shotgun Shug I personally have ever seen. And Pat just comes and beats that somehow, damn near gentleman's. Fantastic performance from Pat Stay. A lot of variety on the styles on this card. Arsenal versus Av. Av has a fantastic body bag over Arsenal, very similar to Brizz's win over Arsenal. Just a showcase performance. And this top 3 is disgusting. K-Shine versus Nitty, one of the best battles in the history of Gnome. Fantastic. Nitty second is historic. Surf versus Geechee, in my opinion, the best battle on Gnome. So these 2 right here absolutely uplift the card a lot. So then at the top of all that, Lux versus Verb, which has aged well for some people. Never have been big on that battle. I think it's one of the lower battles on the card quality-wise, but impact, we know what it did. Some iconic haymakers from both of them. Humongous for Verb's career, has aged well for Lux's too. So top to bottom, you have everything. You have impact, you have the names, you have the top tier quality classics and performances. And that's why I believe Gnome 9 is easily the best gnome of all time. And that will be my full list, guys, here, ranked from the worst to best gnomes of all time, all 11. I do believe with Gnome 12 coming up, there's been a little bit of hate for the card, but I could see it falling somewhere in that 6 to 8 region. I think it's going to be a decent gnome. I don't think that it's going to be super duper classic. A lot of people are super underwhelmed by the card. I'm not, I think, a little underwhelmed, but I still like the card. And I think it's going to produce some goodies. There's just some decent matchups in there. And some people don't like decent. They just want amazing every single gnome, every single SM, which is fair to ask for. They are the marquee events, guys, but you're not always going to have, Lux walking through it. Some people are like, where's the daylight? Where's this? Not every card is going to be, just jumping out like that. And I think there's some good matchups on it. So I expect Gnome 12 to be middle of the pack. Also, I did plan on saying the performance of the nights. I'm realizing, recording back, I did not give the performance of the night that I had for each card. I'm going to have it typed out and under the boxes. So, you know, if I won't have a full explanation on each, but if you guys get at me in the comments down below. I'm definitely down to debate it. Get at me at Twitter. But overall, I think I did a pretty accurate job ranking here. Some of these can definitely be flipped around. It's up for preference, but I think, you know, like I said, Gnome 9 is a pretty sturdy number 1, and Gnome, the perennial gnome, not perennial is the wrong word, but you know what I mean, the first gnome ever being number 2. I'm pretty confident in those 2 picks, but you guys let me know, what do you think is the best gnome of all time? Better yet, comment down below, what is the most slept on gnome of all time? We all know that everyone will probably say Gnome 9 for the best, but what do you think is the gnome that doesn't get enough recognition? I had Gnome 6 or Gnome 7 up there, but I want to hear your guys' opinions. But this will be my last little run of the gnome content up to gnome. It's been very great gnome season. Can't wait to give you guys a recap, and just to see this in the building. It's gonna be, it's gonna be fun. My first gnome I've ever went to, so I'm definitely looking forward to it. But yeah, it's been J Small Reviews here, guys, and I'm gonna catch you on the next one. Peace.